So, the figure of Jesus, we all know he's a cornerstone of Christianity around the globe. But what happens when that figure, who's so often shown with European features, arrives on a continent with its own incredibly rich ancient traditions? Well, today we're going on a journey to understand how Jesus has been experienced and completely reimagined within Africa. And this powerful question from theologian John Taylor, it gets right to the heart of it all. See, it's not about forcing an answer onto a culture, it's about discovering one from within it. If Christ were to truly speak to African realities, what would he actually look like? To even begin to answer that, you have to diagnose the problem. And some thinkers, like the great Desmond Tutu, have used this term faith schizophrenia. It describes this deep internal split, this feeling that to embrace a European-looking Christ was to betray your own African heritage, a really painful conflict. So before we can get to the resolution, we have to understand where this conflict came from. And that brings us to our first big question. How was Christ first perceived on the continent? You might expect a figure of comfort, but the initial experience was often one of total alienation. As one theologian, Eni Ben Udo, puts it, Christ didn't arrive as a savior for many people. He came across as a forceful, impatient, and unfriendly tyrant. Basically, a complete stranger who seemed to be telling them their entire history was wrong. But why? Why was he seen that way? To get that, we have to zoom out and look at the history. The missionary movement, which often came right alongside colonialism, created what we can call the experience of a stranger. And wow, this slide just lays out the disconnect perfectly. On one side, you have the missionary goal. And look, it was often sincere, this desire to save souls. But on the other side, the actual African experience was devastating. History was suppressed, culture was looked down on, and maybe most importantly, that vital connection to their ancestors was broken. Ugandan theologian John Waligo just puts it so bluntly. He says, the root cause of so much suffering was this deep, deep experience of rejection. And that's the wound. That's the fundamental problem that had to be healed before the Christian faith could ever really feel at home in Africa. And honestly, that feeling of rejection is what makes this next part of the story so incredible. We're at the turning point now. This is the journey from guest to kin, where this outsider figure starts, somehow, to become family. And the first step towards this reconciliation, it came from a really surprising place, the Bible itself. When many Africans started reading the Old Testament, there was this shock of recognition. The world it described, its values, its stories, it all felt so familiar. All across the continent, people were saying, wait a minute, this is our story. And you can see exactly why it felt so real. The biblical world just clicked with core African values. I mean, a strong sense of kinship, the importance of passing down stories orally, the whole experience of liberation in the Exodus, it all resonated. Even things like the role of spirits and ancestors. Suddenly, that huge cultural gap didn't seem so huge anymore. Theologians have described this whole process as a kind of four-step journey, and it's just a beautiful way to see it. Jesus starts as a stranger. Then, through that incredible African hospitality, he's welcomed as a guest. Then, by affirming the local values, he becomes kin, part of the family. And then, in this amazing reversal, the former stranger becomes the host, welcoming everyone into a new, transformed family. So what's the real difference between being a guest and being kin? It's huge. I mean, look at this. As a guest, yeah, Jesus participates in weddings and funerals, he's shown hospitality, but he's still an outsider. But as kin, it's so much deeper. He's actively affirming life, he's challenging old divisions, he's sharing in a common destiny. It's a two-way street. He truly belongs. This deep sense of belonging as kin, well, it leads to the final and most transformative stage of the whole journey. How does Jesus go from being part of the family to becoming the one who welcomes everyone else in? How does he become the African host? Well, the theological engine behind this is a concept called the Paschal imagination. Now, that might sound a little academic, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's that the risen Christ isn't an outsider to any culture. Instead, he embraces and transforms all people in all times from the inside out. He doesn't erase local culture, he fulfills it. According to John Taylor, this new understanding brought two massive surprises to the African worldview. First was this idea that God wasn't some distant, far-off being, but was right there, deeply involved in human life. And second
was discovering a common ancestor for all of humanity, which creates a kind of solidarity that's bigger than any one tribe.
And what about the ancestors? They are so central to African spirituality. While the idea here is just revolutionary, the thinking goes that Christ doesn't replace them, he redeems them. By conquering death, he offers them a new future, what's been called life for the dead. And you can see this newly imagined African Christ celebrated everywhere in the explosion of African-instituted churches. Their appeal is off the charts, and it's because they embody everything we've been talking about. They are literally founded by Africans for Africans. They worship in their own languages, express their faith with drums and dance, and create this powerful sense of belonging. Now, this entire journey isn't just about abstract ideas, not at all. It has profound, real-world implications for society. And as we're about to see, this journey is still very much continuing today. So, what does a truly African church look like in practice? Two really powerful models have emerged. First, the listening church, which is based on the traditional idea of an African palaver, where a leader hears from everyone before making a decision. And second, the church as family, built on that incredible African principle, I am because we are. And this gets right to the heart of the church's mission in society. As Emmanuel Marty says, the logic is simple and powerful. It is only a liberated church that can liberate. A church has to free itself from foreign cultural baggage before it can be a true force for liberation for everyone else. So who will lead this charge for liberation? Well, the theologian Mercy Amba Odioye points directly to the women of Africa. She calls them the daughters of a Noah, a figure from folklore, a prophet who spoke truth to power. She argues that these women will be the true agents of liberation, weaving a new story for the entire continent. Which brings us right back to that central image, from stranger to guest to kin, and finally, to host. If Jesus is now the host in Africa, it leaves us with one last crucial question to really think about. What does the family meal he serves, a meal of justice, community, and abundant life, actually look like in Africa today?